Girls are twice as likely as boys to have anxiety.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, boys are taken in to get help more because often they go outward with their anxiety, whereas girls go inward.
Okay, so wait, say that again. So girls are disproportionately affected, but
girls are twice as likely to experience anxiety, but boys are taken to get help more often to see therapists.
Interesting. Why do you think that is? You said girls go inward, but boys are getting treated more often.
Boys tend to act out in school. Boys tend to, it shows up more as anger, whereas often I think for girls, it shows up as more perfectionism. And even something I'm seeing, which Niro, I don't know that we've ever talked about this. I'd be curious if you're seeing it. Just in the last 2 years, I've seen more anxiety in girls showing up as obsessive-compulsive types of symptoms. We wouldn't necessarily diagnose them with obsessive-compulsive disorder, but so many symptoms of that. And it feels really rampant among girls today.
I would say that's true. And just especially when we look at how social media affects girls as well, disproportionately, and how we've seen that correlated in the mental health statistics for girls as young as, I think it's 11, 12 years old.
Yes.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Paula Vera Show. I am your host, Paula. We are doing an entire month-long series on teenagers and parenting, tackling one different topic each week. Last week, we dove right in and talked about the gaslighting of parents to believe that they only have 18 summers with their kids, which is an absolute lie. And this week, we are talking about the mental health crisis and its direct link to technology, social media, and the pandemic. Sissy Goff and Niro Feliciano are joining me again this week, as they are joining me all month. Sissy is the executive director at Daystar Counseling, and Niro Feliciano is a cognitive psychotherapist as well as a mom of 4. So when it comes to mental health and this crisis, there is a direct link to tech, to social media, and the pandemic. This is really the specialty of Niro because she is a cognitive psychotherapist who really specializes in the areas of anxiety and brain science. And she's going to tell you, as well as Sissy, that we as parents, we have to pay attention to the science on this issue. Girls are twice as likely to experience anxiety as boys, but boys are taken to see therapists more. We'll dive into that and explain it. Plus, we're going to talk about what we should look for in our teens when it comes to mental health issues, why it's not too late to turn things around, and the social media platform that both of them are most concerned with. Plus, how social media and tech are physiologically changing the neurochemistry in our kids. As always, stay tuned to the end of this conversation for my takeaways. And if you haven't signed up for my personal newsletter, paulaferrisofficial.com, what are you waiting for? We dive deeper into these conversations and talk about the things that you want to talk about. But without further ado, as we continue our series on teens and parenting, we are talking about the mental health crisis amongst our teens and its direct link to tech and social media. Here's Niro and Sissy. Okay, ladies, I don't know how we're going to top that last conversation about 18 summers and pushing back against the lie and the pressure that we put on ourselves as modern American parents. But this conversation is a must conversation because it's something that you see a lot in your practices. It's the mental health crisis that we're seeing in teenagers. But before we jump in, Sissy, would you like to tell us about a parenting conference that you have coming up in September with a very familiar face that may or may not also be part of this conversation? Who will be a guest speaker?
Yes, September 13th. The fall in Tennessee is gorgeous. And in Franklin, Tennessee, Saturday, September. Oh, I'm so sorry, Paula. Let me make sure I'm saying the right day. That's so bad.
Wait a second. I have to keep this in.
Saturday, September 13th.
September 13th. Okay.
Saturday, September 13th, we are hosting a conference called Raising Capable Kids. David Thomas and I are, and we are so excited, have invited some of the very smartest people we know, which includes Niro.
Love it.
She was an immediate ask when we decided we were going to get to do this. And so we're really excited. We'd love for you to come to town and join us for a beautiful fall weekend and to learn and grow together and laugh and all the things.
Oh, it sounds so fun. And so, Niro, you're going to be speaking at this conference. By the way, can people listening, can they buy tickets to the conference?
They can Yes, if they go to raisingboysandgirls.com, there's a link where they can buy tickets there.
I'll put I'll put everything in the show notes for anyone that's curious. I encourage you to, because David and Sissy are just doing the Lord's work. But Niro, you're going to be speaking at that conference. Tell us a little bit about the topic, or is that to be determined?
Yes, I always look forward to hearing Sissy and David speak. And Paula, you'll relate to this. Every time they come to New York, I tell them they don't make humans like you in New York. They don't exist at all. No. So I love spending time with them and listening to them. But I'm going to be on a panel talking about parent self-care and what that looks like, because it might look a little different than we think. And then leading a breakout session on teens and mental health.
Oh, so 2 breakouts.
Looking forward to it.
And a panel.
Okay.
And so much great information from Niro.
Niro's finding out about that extra breakout
right now.
In real time.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of, I think, your topic about parents and self-care goes along with our conversation last week about the pressure that we're putting on ourselves as parents. But mental health, teens, the effects of tech, I think, cannot be underscored. There's a direct correlation between our teens' mental health and tech. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. Not only what the problem is and why it exists, and then how to find solutions for it. But I want you both to talk about what you're seeing in your practices when it comes to teens and mental health. I pulled some statistics and data, but you may shoot this down and say, Paula, that's not right. But this is what I found. Not only is there a mental health crisis, teen mental health is a growing concern. Statistics show a rise in mental health conditions and related challenges amongst adolescents. According to the Healthy Children Organization, nearly 1 in 3 adolescents between 13 and 18, you're both shaking your head, so I think this is true. Okay, nearly 1 in 3 between 13 and 18 will experience an anxiety disorder. And the Pew Research Center says 13% of teens now experience depression. There is a mental health crisis amongst our teens. You're seeing this inherently at both of your practices. Why do you think we're seeing such spikes?
Girls are twice as likely as boys to have anxiety.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, boys are taken in to get help more because often they go outward with their anxiety, whereas girls go inward.
Okay, so wait, say that again. So girls are disproportionately affected, but
girls are twice as likely to experience anxiety, but boys are taken to get help more often. To see therapists.
Interesting. Why do you think that is? You said girls go inward, but boys are getting treated more often.
Boys tend to act out in school. Boys it shows up more as anger, whereas often I think for girls it shows up as more perfectionism. And even something I'm seeing, which Niro, I don't know that we've ever talked about this. I'd be curious if you're seeing it. Just in the last 2 years, I've seen more anxiety in girls showing up as obsessive-compulsive types of symptoms. We wouldn't necessarily diagnose them with obsessive-compulsive disorder, but so many symptoms of that. And it feels really rampant among girls today.
I would say that's true. And just especially when we look at how social media affects girls as well, disproportionately, and how we've seen that correlated in the mental health statistics for girls as young as, I think it's 11, 12 years old.
Yes.
That makes sense, Sissy, because Sissy and I had a conversation a couple years back about phobias, this resurgence of phobias, and especially one phobia that one of my youngest daughters struggled with, emetophobia, which is a fear of throwing up. And it was the call that many therapists were getting the most of post-COVID. And even before COVID, we saw a rise in it. But that falls on that OCD spectrum. So I think you saying that obsessive behavior, we're seeing it come out in many different forms. But I would say for sure, body image. We saw the change in mental health, especially for females. And Jonathan Haidt talked about this when that front-facing camera was developed on the phone as well. There's just this scrutinization of the way that the girls look, and that affects the girls. We're seeing body image issues with boys too, especially in the amount of protein they're taking and weights they're lifting and creatine, all of those things. That's more what it looks like for boys, but for girls, certainly that whole selfie generation, I wrote a whole chapter about it in my first book. I mean, it's been there since, I think, 2011. We've seen a steady increase in the amount of girls who are presenting these disorders, and that correlates with the time those social media platforms became big.
Do you think this is one of your biggest concerns in both of your practices, and one of the larger topics that you are addressing in both of your practices is mental health and teens?
Yes, constantly, daily. I'm having those conversations. Yes. And I don't know, Paula, how much you and I've talked about this, Niro knows this, but one of the things we do at Daystar is we have a little, where I'm a practicing therapist, we have a little summer retreat program for the kids that are in counseling, which is where I'm living right now, where I spend the summer. I'm the director of the program. So all of June, I was living with middle and high school kids, which is such a gift, honestly, as a therapist, because I get to watch.
Yes.
Rather than just in an hour, I'm getting to watch more of what's happening daily, hourly, ongoing. And I mean, I feel like I see evidence of it in new ways every summer. But one of the most striking pieces of it, well, I would say two. One, I think the combination of everything we're talking about social media and technology and the pandemic have caused them to go so inward in a way that's really confusing for them. And I think it's making the mental health issue exponentially worse because they're not even talking. They're not reaching out. I don't think they have a sense of purpose in a lot of ways. We did a little exercise. It was one of my favorite things we did with the 9th and 10th graders. We set up this yoga exercise, and one of the counselors was leading it, and another counselor from the back of the room said, "Caroline, what are you doing? You're not even good at this," which is so not how we are at Hopetown. And she was basically acting out that critical voice we have. And so Caroline ran out of the room and ran next door, and all the girls followed and walked in, and there were streamers everywhere and strings going from one place to another, and we acted out what it was like to be inside Caroline's mind. And so they had to do these exercises, like negative thoughts coming at them, and they had a friend who actually batted the negative thoughts away with a pillow, and another one, they had to put on a blindfold, and a critical voice was telling them they were messing up, and they had to walk through strings, but there was their own voice there and God's voice both saying to them which way to turn, and they had to learn to listen. I mean, these things to actually experience, because kids are such experiential learners, more of what's happening inside of them. But I think one of the biggest problems that I've seen come from both of those things is developmentally, it has shifted kids considerably. So my 11th and 12th graders that were here, if I had met them 8 years ago, I would have said hands down they were 9th and 10th graders. 9th and 10th graders, they're acting and functioning and thinking more like 7th and 8th graders. And there's a trickle down because all these things have hindered them so much developmentally and slowed them down that we're seeing a huge impact in
When
them.
you say these things have hindered and slowed them down, what are these things?
I would say 3 of the biggest culprits are technology, social media, and the pandemic. And then the mental health crisis that has emerged out of those 3 things coming together.
Okay. I really I want to jump into the tech aspect of it because in just a second, because you can't have this conversation about mental health without having a conversation about tech because it's such a driver of the mental health crisis. But when we're talking about the mental health crisis and, particular conditions, we're talking anxiety, right? We're talking depression, suicidal ideations. What else are we talking about in that bucket? And what should we look for as parents because you talked about perfectionism, you talked about OCD, which you may not think that that's a mental health condition, but what should we be looking for? Changes in sleep patterns, what type of behaviors should we be looking for if we're concerned about our kids and their mental health?
Certainly pervasive worry, motivation changes. That's a big one. Sleep patterns, appetite, just a withdrawal from the things that they would normally do in their daily life. And especially when it begins to interfere with their ability to engage in their life in a normal, healthy way. I always say that's a good time for intervention. And I love what Sissy says is, first read the books about it and see if it moves the needle. And if it doesn't, give it a little bit of time, then contact someone who can help walk you through it. And I always say the sooner the better, especially with kids, because they don't have to suffer. We have treatments, we have therapy who can help them, get back on their feet sooner than later. And especially with kids, being that unlike adults, it's interrupting their learning, it's interrupting their social and emotional development. the sooner you intervene, the better. Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating that it's interrupting their development. Okay, you guys, so I'm almost 50 years old and I am in the throes of perimenopause. I did not think that a good night's sleep was possible. Here's how it usually plays out in my home. I'll go to bed and I'm freezing and I pile a ton of covers on, and then I wake up in the middle of the night and then I have to shed all of those covers. This is a vicious cycle that I have been in for over 10 years until now because of Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets. You need to run, not walk, but run to get yourself a set of these sheets. They are made from bamboo. They naturally wick away the heat and the moisture from your body, so they help you to sleep several degrees cooler. I promise you, you're going to get the best sleep of your life. They also have a 10-year warranty and a 100-night sleep trial. So try them out. If you don't love them, if you aren't sleeping cooler, return them hassle-free. But trust me, you're going to want to keep them. And right now you can get 40% off if you use my code Paula. Go to cozyearth.com, use the code Paula, 40% off. Run, don't walk to get yourself a set of these sheets, because your bed should be more than a place to sleep. It should be your happy place. And Cozy Earth makes that possible and a whole lot cooler. Niro, as the three of us were brainstorming ideas, okay, what do we want to talk about throughout this series? And you were both talking about mental health and how it's such a concern in both of your practices. But you brought up something really fascinating. And yes, you're a psychotherapist and you really focus on anxiety and brain function. You talked about the way that social media and tech, and I'm going to totally botch this, but it's hijacking the neurochemistry of our children and the way that their brains are wired and the dopamine effect. It's almost like when we give our kids these phones and social media, we're kind of handing them a ticking time bomb. We don't really know what this is. All the facts are coming out now, but talk to us about what it's actually doing to our kids' brains and how it's rewiring them and how it sounds terrifying.
Sure. I'll frame it this way, just in the clinical side of things. I would say even 5 or 6 years ago, I was starting to see kids come in, even kids who I'd seen in high school who then went to college, complaining of lack of motivation. And they were starting to describe all these symptoms of depression. And let's say 15 years ago, I would have automatically said, okay, this kid is depressed. All of a sudden, we begin to say, okay, let's look at how often you're on your screen. How much screen time do you have? That became a very regular intake question when I was seeing a young person. And there, even though we say correlation doesn't equal causation, I mean, there was some strong correlations there between the amount of screen time they had and some of the symptoms we were seeing. And I will share this because now, thankfully, one of my kids is in a better place mentally, but she was going through some depression. And one of the first things I said to her is, let's look at screen time, because this is a very real driver now of depression. And I sat there with a piece of paper and I said, I'm going to explain it to you. So I drew her this bell curve, this chart, and this is describing this phenomenon called the dopamine deficit. The first place I read about this was in the book Dopamine Nation, which was written by psychiatrist Anna Lemke, who was talking about essentially the psychology of addiction. And how she describes it is when we're getting these really high levels of dopamine, physiologically unhealthy levels of dopamine, which is what we get every time we are looking at new or novel information. So think about how much the algorithm learns your kid, finds out what they like, and is constantly feeding them new information. That is creating surges of unhealthy levels of dopamine in the brain. And what the body will do, what the brain will do, because it's really smart, is it wants to bring that back to a physiologically healthy level of dopamine. But what it has to do is it has to essentially downregulate receptors. So it basically sends a message that we don't need all this dopamine. We're going to drop it, our need for dopamine really low. When that dopamine need drops low is where you start seeing those symptoms of anger and irritability and lack of concentration. It's essentially your body going through some level of withdrawal from dopamine. So that's what I believe we're seeing in these kids now that are presenting so readily with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So what happens is when they're not getting those high levels, they're in this state of a dopamine deficit. So when the normal challenges of their life start happening, which normally at healthy levels of dopamine you can deal with, you have a little bit more resilience. All of a sudden, we're seeing kids go 0 to 60. All of a sudden, we're having anxiety disorders, depression. Sissy can attest to how soon we're seeing kids develop suicidal ideation from really pretty much like everyday challenges that kids 20 years ago were handling, right?
Wow.
And we believe this also in part is due to that change in neurochemistry we're seeing with kids.
Is it reversible though? If they take it, it is reversible. So it's not a permanent. Okay. Anything but the brain. I mean, the brain can be rewired.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing, right?
Yes. So, neuroplasticity. Yes.
Yes. And I'll just give you a quick example of that. So I take high school interns in their senior year for a month, doing an internship with them every May. And I had 5 girls and we talked about the dopamine deficit. And I said, here's one thing you can do to limit your dopamine. Put your phone on grayscale. So they changed it in the settings. It's through accessibility and color filters. You can change it to grayscale. And after one day, they came back and they were reporting what they found. And what they said, one girl said, is I got mad every time I looked at my phone. And I said, do you know why? Because those colors, the bright colors, increase your dopamine and you're getting something from it that now you've just taken away and you're experiencing what the fallout is emotionally when that is removed. They also found that they could go to their phone and actually do the thing they went in to do without getting pulled into all these other areas.
All these notifications and dings.
That's right. And other visually stimulating things just by putting it on grayscale mode. So many of them left it on grayscale for days and weeks after because eventually they liked how they felt. They liked the way that they were able to control their usage more of the phone. And that is related to dopamine.
My daughter asked for me to buy her an app called Be Present, I think is what it's called.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, she loves it. She said, Mom, the more I'm on my phone, the more anxious I am. She understands. And I think all of us understand that there's this direct correlation. I think you'd have to be clueless not to connect the dots. So in your practices, are you guys shocked that more hasn't been done to regulate social media? I know we're seeing other countries ban social media. Jonathan Haidt, as you mentioned earlier, Niro has a fantastic book, The Anxious Generation, how social media is basically robbing kids of their childhood. But are you surprised because there is such a direct link from mental health to social media and tech that more hasn't been done to regulate it?
I've been hopeful that there has, at least in Nashville, we're seeing a lot of schools that are making some big changes in terms of phones. So I do think institutionally some things are shifting. I think it's really hard on parents. The phones are going to be the place you're going to be the bad guy if you're aware as a parent more than probably anything else anymore, more than alcohol, drugs, any of those things. I mean, that's just going to be the place that you're going to have to step in.
Yeah.
And phones are convenient for parents, for kids to have. And so I think that is part of the hindrance of it. And I think kids feel like it is their lifeline socially. And so if my mom or dad takes that phone, if they limit my time, they are going to cause me to cut myself off socially, and I'm going to miss everything. And so I think there's so much pressure from kids to their parents of, you can't make these changes. You can't do this to me.
That's 100%, Sissy. And I also think that we have done something a certain way for now over a decade, so parents have handed their kids phones when they've gone to middle school. And I can tell you what we did in our family. 3 of my kids got phones when they went to middle school. And then this research started coming out. And I told my youngest, Carolina, I love you so much, but you're not getting a phone. I know all your 3.
I did the same with my youngest.
Well,
way to go, y'all.
Yes. Because it's almost, and no judgment to anyone. Everyone has their own situations. But especially as a clinician, knowing what I know, it feels irresponsible to hand a phone with social media, with the internet, to an 11-year-old. I gave her 2 years notice because I knew she'd take that long to get it. And she ended up getting an Apple Watch. And also I spoke to other parents and asking them, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to give your child? Many people agreed to do the Apple Watch. So that child knew, my daughter knew she was not alone. And I think that is really important, to find your people who also understand this, who want to support their kids in the same way so your child doesn't feel alone. But I can still tell you with all the research, there are many parents who still give their kids a phone.
Because it's convenient, honestly, sometimes.
Yes. It is.
Like right now, I have no idea where my 11-year-old is and what he's doing. I mean, I have parental controls on his iPad. He doesn't have a phone. I don't know what he's doing. I told him, I said, don't get on the TV because our internet's so slow right now. So I said, just play on your iPad or read a book, right? And so sometimes it is convenient. Niro, I'm with you. After the new research came out and Jonathan Haidt's movement, The Anxious Generation, I gave both of my kids, my older kids, flip phones. I love a good flip phone, by the way. You guys. Isn't it just so satisfying when you want to hang up on somebody? Just smack it close. Oh my gosh, there's nothing more satisfying. I miss my BlackBerry too, but I told him, I said, sweetie, I love you, but you're not getting a phone till you're 16 or social media. And I know that that's not going to sound fair, but there's been so much new research. I said, I love you too much. And I know it's not going to feel fair, but that's just how it is. And so it's hard. Way to go, Paula. It's hard once you've already, and my middle guy's 15. So like technically he should, but he couldn't care less really about social media. He's like a unicorn. He really is. He's more into basketball. That's why I'm all about go play. I'll support you. Because he's really into that. But what do you tell the parent who, like me, has already given phones or social media and allowed it with their older children, but they have younger children, they want to do something different. And it's not going to feel fair. Like, how do we explain that away?
I don't think you can ever explain you're never going to help a child learn that no is fair. I mean, there's just not any explanation that they're going to say, oh, Mom, I get it. Yeah, it's fine that my friends have it and I don't. And I think that's a trope, like we've talked about before, that we can put on ourselves. And I think sometimes the more we explain and try to convince them that things are fair, the more they require an explanation.
Okay. No, that's good. Sometimes you just have to say, I know it's not fair, but that's just how it is.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
My 11-year-old was not happy with that idea. Now, I can still contact her and call her with an Apple Watch. So that was the convenience piece of it. But I do think this conversation is a little more nuanced, and I will explain. I actually had dinner with Jonathan Haidt at this event. I was sitting next to him. Actually, our mutual friend, Amy Julia Becker, invited me to this.
Oh, awesome.
And heard him speak. And it was interesting, the timing, because the day I met him, my 14-year-old, she might have been 13 at the time, asked me for Snapchat. And she had not had Snapchat. And he said to me, you said no, right? And I said, no, I didn't. I said, we'll have a conversation about it. And Lisa D'Amour has now started speaking more about how this is more nuanced. It is not a black and white issue. And especially for girls, something that we've seen more is most of their communication happens through Snapchat. It is not text. They do not text. So I have seen girls who don't have it really live a very isolated life, and we don't want that for them either. So it is not that simple. And what I've told my youngest, who does not have social media and who does not have Snapchat, I was like, we will continue talking about this. This is the decision for right now, but let's see how life goes. Let's see how sixth grade goes. And we will continue to talk about it, because I want her to feel like she is a part of that conversation. And I also think that at some point, this is where I think Jonathan Haidt had to take it to the extreme just to get us like 30% of the way, and I appreciate that. But we also can't expect, unless we're teaching them these skills, that we're just all of a sudden at 18, they're going to have all they need to navigate this, right? There's not something magical that happens at 18 that all of a sudden they can navigate social media and they can navigate phones, or 16. And we don't want to send them the message either inadvertently that you can't handle it. So I think continuing to have these conversations and collaborating with them. And again, like Sissy said, sometimes we do have to kind of lay it out and say, no, this is not for now. At least that's how I feel, Sissy. I would love for you to weigh in on that. I do think it has to be an ongoing conversation that reflects their situation, their maturity, and their life in that moment.
Yes, I agree. When people say, what's the magic age for a child to have X? my response is always, you don't want to be the first. You don't want to be the last.
Yeah.
You want to be the next to last. Because,
Yes.
because I think you're right. I think it's nuanced in a lot of different ways. And we don't want to damage their relationships socially, because friendships, and particularly for girls, are so much of where they draw their identity. And I think I love the conversation, because I think it's, how do we give them a voice, let them know we're in the conversation with them, and hold off as long as we can for their safety. But knowing if they really are the last one in their entire grade, at that point, we are hindering them socially, and it's not going to be helpful. But if we do hop on Snapchat, then I want us to have conversations about snap maps. And I want us to have conversations about streaks and the specific things that I think impact them even more in terms of emotions and anxiety. And Niro, to your great point, as we're saying, we're going to keep talking about this, I think you earn the right to have a voice more all along the way. And so you can step into those conversations.
Yeah, I think one of the hard and fast rules that I've heard from just about every parenting expert is no phones in the bedroom overnight.
Yes.
And they really don't like phones in the bedroom at all, because that's where you can get into trouble. So when you're talking about healthy boundaries, I'm with you, Niro. Snapchat, I couldn't deny my daughter. I don't even think my son wants it. So like I said, he's a unicorn. I don't even have to check his phone really, because he's rarely on it. But Snapchat, for my daughter, she's very social, and I didn't want her to feel alienated from those conversations. So that was one of the first social media apps that she got. But a hard, fast rule in our home, no phones in the bedroom at night. I mean, sometimes they can have them in the bedroom if their door's open, but that's a hard and fast rule. My 17-year-old, she's going to be 18. Still, I'm like, if you're in this house, no. I mean, I don't even like my phone in my bedroom at night either. So healthy boundaries for you, for the both of you, when it comes to social media, tech, and the mental health conversation, because they go hand in hand, right?
Before we jump to that, can I say one more thing I would want to caution against?
You can say whatever you want, Sissy.
Okay.
Yes, I am all ears.
Well, I think as we're talking about Snapchat, the platform I am most concerned about, and Niro, I feel like you're probably seeing some of the same currently, is TikTok, hands down. Because I believe, and I can't remember, Paula, if we talked about this before, but I think TikTok has become the source for kids to learn about mental health. And so I'm seeing kids diagnose themselves before they would necessarily need a diagnosis, and figure out what they need to do to help them work through whatever that diagnosis is, based on influencers on TikTok.
Wow.
And I mean, I will never forget a 13-year-old telling me she had created a TikTok account to spread helpful information about mental health. If they're watching 13-year-olds as the voice of truth
on social
in terms
media,
of mental health, yes, it's so concerning. And so I think that is one I would recommend holding off on the longer end, if at all possible. And if they get on, then having conversations about, okay, what are you using TikTok for? Who are the people that you're going to trust on TikTok, and why?
Right.
And who are the people you really do want to trust in your life about this variety of issues?
Yeah. And Snapchat, I feel like I talked to the founder of Wait Till 8th, which is a movement to encourage parents to wait until 8 to give their kids a phone and any social media. And she said Snapchat was the first app she allowed her kids to have, because it wasn't so focused on what everybody else thought and the likes. It was just communication.
The algorithm.
Yeah. Yes. So, but I don't know. I can only imagine social media has totally changed both of your practices and how you treat your patients.
For sure. And I think Sissy had mentioned the Snap Map. I see that as a huge issue, because kids know where other kids are at all times. They know when they're included. They know when they're excluded. They know what other people are doing. And it really interrupts everything, their daily life, So I think, like Sissy said, we can have conversations about Snap Map. We can have conversations about streaks, what these kids are doing, and the time they're devoting to keeping up these streaks that interfere with their life. As to the phones out of the bedroom, part of that is because a lot of these kids who have phones in their bedroom, they don't silence their notifications. They're getting these notifications all through the night as their friends are on it and who don't have limits on their phone. And not only that, I mean, Sissy, I bet you've seen this when you've had a patient think their phone went off and it didn't. It's like this phantom notification
It's
syndrome.
so distracting.
It really is. So they're always aware of it. So getting it out of proximity and out of mind, they will just have a better sleep. That's one of the things I did with my interns. And they all said not only did they gain time back at night and in the morning, because their phone wasn't the first thing they were going to, they slept better. But the other thing I'll say about TikTok too is the thing that Sissy said is the algorithm is going to learn what they're receptive to. So if there's a certain mental health message, even if it's inaccurate, that they are gravitating to, they're going to see more of that same message. So it almost presents itself as truth because they're going to see it in many different places, even if it's inaccurate in many different places. So that is the danger of those algorithm-based apps as well, whether it's TikTok or Instagram as well.
And it's that instant gratification, the dopamine hit, which changes their neurochemistry, but that can be reversed. So anything that either of you want to say to put, a button in this conversation or a cherry on top?
Well, I just would say we certainly want to be doing as much as we can to help. And I have a book for adolescent girls called Brave about anxiety and mental health. And I think if that could be a resource, I would recommend. I wrote it as we were coming out of the pandemic and seeing anxiety surge so much. And so whether it's a book, whether it's an amazing person like Niro that you can go and meet with, there just is always help, as you said, for your kids. And the sooner that we act and the sooner we help them find their way to help, the better longevity is going to be for them, the better the road's going to be long term.
That book, by the way, helped my daughter tremendously when she was going through her phobia. So it's an amazing book. I'm so grateful to Sissy for all the work that she's written. And I would say, again, pay attention to the science because it does not lie. And the correlations that we're seeing, especially with female mental health and social media, and then find your parental people. Find your people who can support you so you can tell your daughter, oh, this family is doing this as well. And so is this one. So you're not alone. Because that helps them tremendously accept some of the things that they can't control in that moment if they know that they're not alone.
Yeah, because so much of it is peer pressure, and that's a huge part of so much of this. I wanted to get my kid a phone because I don't want them to be the last one, right? The peer pressure component is huge. So excited to dig into our next conversation talking about resilience and are we raising soft kids? I think we all know the answer to that, but we're going to keep talking about it in episode 3, ladies. I'll see you then. And Niro and Sissy will be back next week and the following week as we continue our month-long series on teens and parenting. But I want to encourage you, the listener or the viewer, if you are watching on YouTube, to share this with the people in your life, especially parents and grandparents, as these conversations are something that all of us who are parenting or raising teens, raising kids are struggling with. And look, Sissy and Niro are therapists, but they're living it as well. So I encourage you to share all of these episodes all month long. Okay, it is time for my takeaways. Niro says, pay attention to the science on this issue. And she says it's not too late. She's not giving her youngest a phone because of the fact that there's just too much research. I've said I'm doing the same thing with my youngest. I've already told Landon, look, buddy, I know it's not fair. I know your siblings got phones earlier, but I just know too much now. And that's okay. It's okay if they're disappointed. But Niro said it is important to find people who are also holding tight and fast like you are so that your kids don't feel isolated and alone. It is a way that a lot of kids communicate with one another. It is also nuanced. As Niro said, you can convey to them, this is the decision for now, and you can keep that conversation going. You don't want to send them the message either that they can't handle it. So continuing to have the conversations and collaborating with them. And again, like Sissy said, sometimes we do kind of have to lay it out. But she says you don't want to be the first and you don't want to be the last. As for the platform that is most concerning, and we should be concerned as well, it is TikTok because it's kind of become the place where kids can self-diagnose. The Snap Map, I don't really know a whole lot about this. on Snapchat, but both Sissy and Niro said this is when kids know they're included or when they're excluded. They think it is a huge issue. It's something that we can at least start having conversations with our kids about it if they do have social media, because they know what their friends are doing and it really interrupts their everyday life. So just having those conversations about things like SnapMap and the exclusion, because that does impact their mental health and the isolation that our kids are feeling. One thing that my kids have done, and if you don't know how to do it, just ask them, is doing Grayscale on their phone. Niro mentioned this is something she did with her intern. So essentially, it is a feature on your phone. And again, ask your kids how to do Grayscale. They'll know what I'm talking about. Mike's son, Landon, has done it on his iPad because he doesn't have a phone. But what it does, it turns everything to grayscale. So you're not getting that dopamine hit. And Niro so beautifully explained what the dopamine deficit does and how it can create suicidal ideations and anger and depression. So much of these behaviors that we're seeing from our kids are because of the dopamine deficit. So if you put your phone or your screen or your tablet on grayscale, it's just not in color. And I did it. And I was actually angry at my phone. I didn't even want to look at it because it was so boring. But when we pick up our phone, we get those dopamine hits from the color and the movement and the content that is targeted towards us. Our dopamine levels increase. We get happy. And then when that goes away, we get sad, when we get angry. So if you want to check that out, I encourage you and your kids to do it. Just try it. It's actually a really cool experiment. Again, grayscale mode on your phone or your tablet. If you can't get enough from Sissy and Niro, I encourage you to check out the Raising Capable Kids Conference. It is going to be in Nashville, Saturday, September 13th. I'm going to put a link in my show notes. It's the first ever parenting conference put on by Sissy and David Thomas, her counterpart at Daystar Counseling. So I encourage you to check that out. I will, again, put a link in my show notes as well as a link to their content, their books, everything that you're going to want to devour from here on out. Okay, next week, as we continue the series on teens and parenting, are we raising soft kids? Yeah, I think we know the answer to that. But John is going to join us next week and the week after. So we're going to have a full house starting next week as we continue to talk about it all month long about teens and parenting. I'll see you then. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.